the course of my career, I've discovered that the real way to address today's cybersecurity challenges is not with a widget, it is not with technology. It has everything to do with addressing risk in a different method than we have before. If you are using the same risk methodologies and rating systems and tools that you have primarily used in physical infrastructure, if you're using those same tools in your virtual infrastructure, I don't believe those tools are set to really give you a risk level to identify where your weaknesses are in a converged infrastructure. The second most important thing I feel to address today's cybersecurity challenges is to have that boardroom level conversation, that awkward conversation, and talk about how you guys, or my directors out here for my customers and my executives, how are you talking about that in the boardroom? How are you talking about risk in the boardroom? Okay? So it really starts with you at the top to address today's cybersecurity challenges. It's not technology, it's people. It's people like Chris Close here from Western Dental. Not everybody has a Chris Close. If you don't have a Chris Close, then you need a steering committee at the executive level to talk about how you're addressing today's risk. I truly feel that's the only way we can fortify our environments and protect our intellectual property. Again, it's not plugging the dike and stemming the bleeding. It's a top-down approach. So in that context, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, I have one of my mentors who taught me everything I know, Chris Morales from HITRUST. Chris is a principal engineer at HITRUST, serving as an evangelist and product specialist with focus on securing the hypervisor in the software-defined data center. Next, we have John Cedillo from Palo Alto. He is the America's Field Alliances Manager, and in his role, he's responsible for go-to-market efforts, field sales engagement, and evangelism for technical partnerships. Third, we have Jim Pressmeyer. He's a regional sales manager with Quantum, and he's responsible for selling quantum data protection solutions in the Southwest market. Then from Gemalto, we have Alex Hanway. He is a He's the strategic alliance manager, and he's responsible for creating go-to-market and enable-it strategies for their top-tier technology partners. Finally, from Extra Hop Networks, we have somebody cool here, is Chris Blessington. He's the Senior Director of Marketing at Extra Hop Networks, and he provides innovative wired data analytics platform that delivers operational intelligence for IT professionals. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask kind of a question they are going to take their time to answer in a couple of minutes. Once they're done, we'll do a second question really quick, and then we want questions from our audience, and we'll involve you, okay?
Feel free to chime in at any point, right? This is roundtables or roundtables for that reason. We want the interaction.
Okay, so let me set the context for the first question. This is in terms of infrastructure controls. So, as IT organizations adopt the benefits and consolidation in infrastructure, personnel, and costs, more people are asked to expand their operational role as a result of convergence. An example of that is, maybe your storage administrator is actually your network administrator and VI administrator, as an example, right? We see the convergence of roles and responsibilities. So, the implementation of infrastructure controls must adjust, ensuring proper management and visibility of risks associated with the unification of roles and responsibilities to manage changes in the environment. So the question is, we'll start with Chris Morales first. Chris, what challenges have you managed or seen with your customers and in your experience around infrastructure controls and since the wide adoption of virtual infrastructure, and how are you helping your customers adapt?
So the biggest change that we've seen with virtualization is that when you think about what it's about obviously it's convergence. It's bringing everything into single systems. We've always, for the entire history of IT, had what I like to call a data plane.
Yeah.
So in the sense that as we've come up with a network, we've had a way that users can get to applications and servers over this data plane.
Right.
Well, what virtualization has done is introduce the management plane. So what used to be a physical server room and physical segmentation, where you could have a server in a server room and you had a key card to get in there and you have your gate access, and when you created an administrator for a server or for a network or for a database, they had access to that physical component. Well, obviously with convergence and virtualization, everything becomes an object. So we start to realize everything's a file. Either a server's a file, or a database is a file, or the network. It's all just objects that we can just move around. And when you start to look at a huge, massive, hyper-converged area, it's really just one big server with a whole bunch of files representing different servers. So when you get into the administrative function of that, you're like, okay, I have a guy, he has administrative access to everything on this hypervisor. So if you have a data center admin, or take it just a server admin, his job is to take machines and to provision those and put them out there for different applications.
Right.
And he has to put on specific networks. When you look at the way the controls are now on a hypervisor with the management plane, a user has the rights to do everything carte blanche. And it's not intentional, it's just the way it is. So more than just the security risk, we run into a misconfiguration risk. And ironically, that's what we've seen more of as a bigger issue. And I have two different case scenarios on that where everything happens at scale. The first one was where we worked with a bank. Obviously, with automation, you want everything to be really fast. So you get a lot of scripting, APIs, all the things move that way. So you tell a guy, hey, I need you to shut down these 30 servers. I just need to take down this thing for a specific action. So great, you put that in a script. We actually had a problem where a bank, when he went to go write a script for 30 servers, he took down 30,000 servers. Literally took down everything for 2 hours. And it happens. And it's so easy to do because it's such a simple thing that, hey, this script said to do this, you put it out there, it worked. The second area we had was a university in Canada where, of course, again, automation. The guy's got to provision servers, put it out there, and they got a junior administrator. It's another honest mistake. So he just had to take 500 machines, go put it out there for this internal application to get it running. The problem is that when he provisioned them, he provisioned everything correctly, except he put it on the wrong network segment. And if you ever look at how virtualization works, you pretty much tell it which network segment or subnet you want, which, by the way, is the fastest way for me to bypass all your security controls, because if you create a trusted segment, I can just put things on an untrusted segment. Like, even if I was able to get to it, I can just do that. So this guy did it unintentionally and took things from an internal network to an external network and put 500 internal production servers onto the external network facing the internet. And within 5 minutes, every one of those servers had a spam bot relay. So those we see a lot. And it's just that because the whole idea of virtualization is to do things at scale, mistakes happen at scale too.
Excellent, thank you. John?
Yeah, so I'll actually attack this from a similar angle, but looking at things from the software-defined data center aspect of things. So we've adopted technologies, whether it be the virtualization of compute, storage, and now increasingly on the networking side. And there's such a demand to have all of those capabilities be orchestrated and automated in such a way that you can actually tap into the benefits. Where the game was once an idea of hardware consolidation, now it's flexibility, being able to ramp at scale with speed. One of the things that we're attacking is trying to understand how you can still enable that without having to sacrifice your security posture. So how are you able to enable, if that's a funny way of saying it, how are you capable of enabling multi-tenancy? How are you able to control the way that individuals are accessing applications of various work levels or trust levels on a single physical device?
Right.
So two examples that I would actually hone in on from those as being examples. First and foremost is one that's from a lobbyist firm here in the U.S. that works in the medical space. So what they were trying to do is actually fully enable a multi-tenant architecture off of their own production environment. So By leveraging microsegmentation capabilities and leveraging some of the technology from our strategic partners in VMware, they were able to actually corner off all of the companies that they were doing these lobbying projects for off of their production network, but still being able to manage it as if all of the applications were being virtualized and leveraged across all of them. So definitely multi-tenancy is a major aspect in that. The other side of it being accessing applications of various trust levels. So we have an international financial company that we're working with, and they have something on order of 40,000 servers with a multiplier of that number of servers of actual virtual workloads. So potentially tens of thousands of applications, all of them with varying trust levels. So the ability to actually control how those applications interact with each other, how the users interact with those applications, and what kind of files those applications are able to kick off and move throughout your network, it's a critical consideration, especially when we actually step back and understand that 80% in some cases of the data center traffic is moving east-west. So the ability to segment, to isolate, to quarantine portions of your network and actually have them carved off and clean, that's critical. So that's some of the stuff that we've been doing and some of the challenges our customers have been seeing coming up.
Excellent. Alex, what have you seen?
So what we've essentially been seeing with our customers really is how do we preserve separation of duties in the cloud in a way that still allows people to scale securely. Kind of touching back to the points that were brought up, our approach has essentially been to encrypt the entire virtual machine, or data going into the virtual machine, and then really focus on key management and pre-boot authentication to ensure that wherever that machine goes, whether it's from a trusted secure segment to an untrusted one, that data is in fact protected. Why this is important, where we've really helped our customers take advantage of this, is one of the big benefits of the cloud is the flexibility, it's the ability to burst and to grow and to ramp up these machines quickly. By centralizing the key management for that, we've allowed our customers to do this in a way that doesn't add management overhead, it doesn't add to the cost, and really lets our customers take advantage of the cloud, but still letting storage administrators take care of storage, security administrators take care of security, and when it's moved offsite into whether it's Red 8 or AWS or Microsoft, letting those storage administrators do their job without ever having access to your data. So really that's been our approach. It's been returning control to the customer, letting them do this in a way that scales, but also fitting in their overall strategy of maintaining control on-premise, centralizing their keys and managing those keys while also benefiting from the cloud. So it's been a multi-pronged approach, but really separating duties and giving customers granular levels of control so that their data, wherever it goes, is secure.
Excellent. Great. Good explanation. Jim, go ahead.
So, excuse me, we approach this a little bit different in that our solutions are focused more after there's been a breach. And as part of that, we've been working with customers to develop an incident response plan. And what that allows them to do is to proactively plan for that inevitable phone call. Now, not only is it important to plan for that phone call and have your response ready, nailed, operational procedures done, but it's also crucial to test that plan to make sure that however you're going to react and whatever solution you've implemented is going to be sufficient to deliver the SLAs and everything that you've designed it to do. So I'm going to use an analogy here. A lot of people have planned for disaster recovery. They have, everything outlined. The difference here is that the disaster isn't a physical one, such as a hurricane, an earthquake, a fire. It's a digital one. So we've really been working with our customers to develop that and prevent, chaos when there's an emergency.
Chris?
Thanks very much. So I do want to start with a thanks, though, also, by the way. ExtraHop is, I think, Red 8's newest technology vendor partner, so we're very much appreciative of the chance to be part of the family. So thank you. Thank you for the belief in us, and thank you for having us here.
Our pleasure.
In order to understand, I think, what I'm going to say, it's really important to have just a somewhat of an understanding of what ExtraHop does. ExtraHop is an appliance that is able to look at and analyze and provide you the ability to report against and visualize all application traffic within your environment, all L2 through L7 traffic, regardless of whether it's virtualized, on-prem, in the cloud, doesn't matter. If there's traffic flowing in your network, we can take a tap of that traffic and analyze it. Now, the reason I bring that up is to say that when you can see everything happening in an environment at all time and in real time, clearly there are security implications there. Clearly, if we can help you detect anomalies quicker, examine data exfiltrations more quickly from your storage tier, be able to correlate that against the database tier, clearly there are implications for your security posture. So why does any of that matter? It matters because, and I love how Chris said it, I love the image he evoked of a server room with a rack of servers in it, with somebody with a card key with access. Great vision of the old days, right? Not so much true anymore. You know, in a world where virtualization and hyper-dynamic cloud hybrid environments are taking root, where software-defined data networking is really starting to gain a foothold, what's happening is all of the technologies that you're bringing to bear to run your infrastructures more efficiently, more securely, with more resiliency, at a lower cost, with fewer people, are awesome. But they're adding one significant thing, and that's an inability to really understand what's happening in there. There's a lot of layers of abstraction that you have to deal with every day in your environments. And so ExtraHop is a tool that helps you cut through that fog of war and help you understand with real clarity and with real true visibility what's happening in those environments. So from a security perspective, we think that the ability to detect challenges, detect breaches, detect data exfiltration instantly provides you a much better position to be able to remediate those much, much more quickly.
Let me chime in here with a quick question for the audience. So this is a stat, I love checking this stat every year because the FBI updates it. What's the average amount of time? Let's do a round of hands. What do you think the average amount of time that hackers are on a compromised network before they are detected? Raise your hand if you think it's, let's call it, under 30 days. Under 6 months. Under a year. Yeah, you guys are right. It's about 206 days, typically, that compromised networks go on and the hackers are not detected. So.
If we're throwing stats out there, you want a truly chilling one. I was on a panel, I was telling these guys on a panel last week in New York with the CISO for the state of New York. And she said that as of last year, the average piece of malware that was written to compromise your servers exists in your system for less than 17 seconds. That's chilling. I mean, that is, when you think about the perimeter defenses that you all have built to try and keep those things out, it's one thing to keep them out. It's one thing to be able to detect them once they're there. The other thing to think about is that 90% of malware is custom written to attack your servers. So it's no, again, I hope there's no antivirus vendors in the room, but it really makes you question whether the days of antivirus as a legitimate means of protecting breaches is still out there. If I'm writing custom code that lives on your server for 17 seconds, how do you protect yourself against that?
Well,
The answer is addressing risk from a high level
Yeah.
again. It's not technology, it's that boardroom conversation. I want to take a second.
I just wanted to take that farther just to make a comment,
Okay,
like
go
on
ahead,
what I would do in a virtual environment now that I can, is that I don't have to sit on your network and attack it as long as you think I do anymore. I would actually just copy your server off and put in my own ESXi server at home and spend my time figuring out all your applications, everything you do, then reinsert a malicious server back into your network. And that's
Absolutely.
a lot easier for me to do at home than it is to do on your network. And to that point, one of our approaches to that is the idea is that you can't just now say, who is my server? You got to say, where is my server? And you have to start thinking of ways on how you can ensure that virtual workload is actually running in the physical data center that you say it is. And that's hard to do. It can be done, but it's hard to do.
Thank you, Chris. I want to take a real quick second and involve the audience. I'm sure there's some questions out there. Does anybody want to ask our panelists a couple of questions?
I regret letting Chris borrow my phone last night. One thing that comes up.
Mr. Close.
So Chris, with High Trust, you'd mentioned about an incident where somebody had taken a bunch of, like 500 servers that were on a trusted network and accidentally put them into an untrusted network. It's sort of always a battle between, people on the security side of things to say, hey, look, we should have a separate infrastructure, storage, SAN, compute for untrusted networks from trusted. And the business is like, no, we want to be able to seamlessly move back and forth between these two. We don't want to duplicate effort and so forth. What do you see kind of being the trends in the industry, and are people kind of moving to this, homogeneous environment? And how do you protect that if they do?
Yeah, so what we see is obviously the whole point of virtualization is hyperconvergence, it's less hardware. So what people have been doing now has been trying to do physical air gaps on their virtual hypervisors, which is almost silly because you're defeating the whole point of virtualization. So with every application, they're like, let me just roll out this set of physical hardware. What we're proposing to people, and just to simplify High Trust for people, we're like a firewall for the hypervisor. So we really are just controlling that. So one of the things we do with people is that we can do object-based access controls and object tagging. So you can take a group of networks and a group of servers, group of storage, whatever you want, and then map it to specific admins and say, this is for HIPAA, or this is for business unit A, or this is for application B. It doesn't matter how you put it, but you start putting virtual tagging to define what things are. And then once you have these set of rules, you start to define with policy versus physical construct where and when can things be moved around and where do they exist. So then when you have a person who's supposed to deploy machines and he's got full admin rights, you tell him that you got a couple of internal production networks that you can go to, but you can't go to the external network. That's outside of your zone. Or to go farther, there is the ability that if you have people who do need to do something, let's say it's a mission critical system and it's 30,000 systems, that person does need the rights to shut them down. You just don't want to shut them down within a non-specified time period, or you want to catch a mistake in a script. So we started doing an approach what we called secondary approval, so that if somebody goes to do an action in a virtual environment, it lets somebody else know first so that you have a second chance to catch it. And somebody else can say, oh, I see you want to do that. That's okay, you do that, but you can only do that at midnight tomorrow night. And so let me just change that to specifically to that policy. So it's just putting extra controls in place, not necessarily to stop them, but at least to kind of check on the actions they're doing.
Any other questions from the audience before we go to our second question? Everybody good? Okay, we'll move on here. The second question I want to talk about surrounds segmentation and visibility. So let me set this up here. Between the increasingly rapid evolution of application architectures and the proliferation of state-sponsored actors on our risk landscape in our virtualized environment or wherever this environment is, all of us, all of you, are seeing an increased focus on the attack surface of our customers and the resources that the attackers have at their disposal. So real quick, attack surface. Right now, Chris's attack surface, he has no armor on. He is vulnerable,
Did you just call me weak?
right? We need to harden that attack surface.
Want to arm wrestle? Or?
We go head to head, man. Now let me bring up something really important here. VMware is not a security company. Let me repeat that. That's a very disruptive statement I just made. VMware is not a security company, but we rely so much on that hypervisor as an example. None of the hypervisor manufacturers are specifically a security company. Let's think about that. That's hardcore. All of our assets are on that hypervisor, but that's not a security company. Okay, so we got to think a little bit differently on how we protect that attack surface. The hypervisor is the focused attack surface that I am going to mount my rig-mounted rock driller on top of and start to do work, okay? No bueno. So let me ask the next question for our guys here. Do you think that addressing these risks require an incremental or a completely new strategy on how we approach cybersecurity within this context that I've just talked about? Chris, go ahead.
Well, I obviously think it has to be new.
Absolutely.
So the way I look at it is that you can't, and so it's what I said before, you can't do the things you did before now because they don't exist. It's, so let's take the perimeter thing, like we still like to talk about that. And I know you've moved on from that as well, Palo Alto.
Oh, yep.
So it used to be, okay, great, I'll put my firewall here in front of you and my IPS. What happens when you're like, here's my machine, here's my perimeter, I'm like, okay, I'll just go move it to Amazon, or I'll go move it to Azure, or I'll move it over here. It's like, where's that perimeter now? How is it aware of the machine? There no longer could be an assumption that where you put a layer is aware of what's behind it, and what's behind it's always there. To go even further, what happens when you're just copying and replicating the machine now running simultaneously in 3 different places? I mean, the whole point of virtualization is portability. So you have to be aware of where those applications and where those systems are, and you have to be portable with it,
Great.
which is
Go ahead, John.
kind of leads into what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We scripted this, actually.
Yeah, we worked on it.
And I won't give a juxtaposing response either. So if you snap back 20 years and really take a look at the type of traffic, the type of applications that were being used in enterprise data centers, you had 2. You had email and you had internet. Fast forward to today, and back then you also had traditional port-based firewalls, static-based IPSs, the beginning stages of Norton antivirus, which is a real powerhouse. And fast forward today, you have tens of thousands of applications, many of which have been specifically designed by huge corporations so that they can be efficiency-enabling applications for your business. And those applications have a completely different way of interacting with your networks. And that's the approach that we have at Palo Alto Networks, is that you have to look at security in a completely holistic way. You have to understand, what does your network posture look like? What does your endpoint security posture look like? When you do move into a hybrid public or private cloud environment, how are you securing that perimeter? And even going further than that, how are you actually leveraging the collective intelligence of the entirety of traffic that's moving across the expanded global network? And what kind of information can you glean from that to then make your own systems that much more intelligent, that much more ready to prevent these potential attacks from coming in? Because more and more now, we're starting to see that it's not John Travolta and Hugh Jackman sitting inside of a bar trying to breach your network just to say that they did it. These are nefarious groups sitting on your network for 7 months at a time, trying to move laterally and gain incremental privileges so that they can get to your crown jewels. And that's exactly what we've taken as part of our platform approach, which we were born in the era of net new applications coming to the market, so we took a net new approach to how you need to secure your environment. And I think that, just kind of piggybacking off of you, and not to be redundant, but it definitely requires a completely revolutionary way of architecting your environment.
Excellent. Alex.
So I've got a slightly different perspective, but I very much like the idea of thinking about this holistically. And I think the answer to your question is, I'll think a little bit of both.
Sure.
Right? So we talk about the cloud, but this doesn't, and virtualization, but this doesn't exist in isolation from what you see legacy-wise in the data center.
Right.
These things interact together, and I think
Right.
really the solution is to attach the security to the data itself. The idea of building a perimeter or keeping things out is just not feasible. Whether it's 206 days or 17 seconds, the breach is going to happen.
Yeah.
Mobility is there, your data is moving around, and the only really clear way to provide that security is to encrypt it so that wherever it resides,
And keep it persistent, no matter where it goes.
exactly. So encrypt it from the beginning and lock your keys away. Make key management and encryption the focus, and really take the pressure off of the perimeter. I mean, it still has a place, it's still important. But as your virtual machines move around, as you benefit from the flexibility, using encryption as the basis really secures you. And so from an incremental perspective, I mean, there's a layered approach that comes along with this, and there are fundamental tools that we can all access, that we can all use for this level of encryption that doesn't impact performance, they're cost effective, they totally fit with the cloud strategy, but the revolution really needs to change, it has to come with a way that we think about this.
Right.
And it's not just architecting the way that we anticipate how data is going to flow, but really how we make the argument for security. And we talk about this as a CapEx or an OpEx model, and whether or not there's a risk-reward dynamic and whether or not we're going to make these outlays. But what do you think Target would prefer to do right now? Get back their $60 million that they settled with Visa, or make the $500,000 investment up front to implement that level of security?
Right.
Really. So I think it's both. We don't know what the future is going to hold. I mean, every month you hear of a new technology that's changing the way that we're consuming data in the internet.
Yep.
And a one-size-fits-all revolutionary approach to security is just going to change, it's going to evolve. So really, I think it's the fundamental that carries this through, and taking as a layered approach. So it's a bit of both.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So again, we're a little bit after the fact. So, after there's been a breach, what do you do? And one of the techniques that we've seen in addition to the incident response plan is packet capture. So capturing all the packets and providing a black box of data, so to speak, within your data set. And, when talking to CISOs about packet capture specifically, there are three kind of main themes that come up. Number one, if you're going to do this, you need to make sure that you capture 100% of the packets. You can't have packets being laying on the floor. Otherwise, what good is that data set? Because Murphy's Law proves the ones that you're going to need are on the floor. So if you're going to do it right. The second thing that's very important with this is, with this pristine black box of data, you need it to be high performance enough to be able to continue to ingest the data while then also sending out queries to go find out where the hack was. So you got to have a pretty robust system to be able to process all of this.
Right.
The other thing that's very important with this is the capability to tear out the data. So we've heard a lot about cloud, et cetera. But when you have this pristine black box of data, most CISOs have a finite budget to store a finite amount of days to be able to go back in time and look at. They want the capability to tier this out to other lower cost tiers of storage so that they can get more days and be able to protect their company more. So the capability to tier that out to cloud or even to tape or something that's not as expensive has been absolutely critical. So I think taking these three design points into consideration, along with an incident response plan, will ultimately lead to higher speed of resolution, and has been mentioned here all week, speed wins.
So without that data, after you're managing a security incident, you're dead. You have no visibility.
Flying
You cannot demonstrate to anybody what was going on. That puts yourself in a compromising situation. That decreases the value of your organization because you're not organized, as an example.
Real quick, great points made here. Three points I want to make, one of which I hope is a little surprising to you. First of all, no doubt, the new rules require a new way of thinking. I would argue that unless, and you've heard the phrase CISO many times here, I used it once already. Some of you may already have one in your organization, some of you may not. That's awesome, and I think having a CISO is great. It certainly shows a commitment or at least an awareness of the problem, but unless your senior-most executives in your organization are completely bought into establishing a meaningful security posture, you're working with one arm tied behind your back. So as the folks who are out there in the world making this happen, anything that you can do to leverage support to help you sell up the chain, the importance of this, and again, clearly people are understanding the importance of it, but from a practical, what you install and what you manage and what you invest in perspective, that's a really key ingredient. Second thing I want to say is, and with all due respect to me and the other vendors on the panel, I heard the smartest person I've ever heard talk about security left me with one thing, and they said, security can't be vended. Vendors are critically important. The tools that us vendors invest with you are incredibly important. But security is more than anything else a mindset. It's a philosophy. And I loved how Alex said it. He didn't use the word philosophy, but we share that. We share that view very, very much. And so, anything you can do to advocate and evangelize for security, a security posture that isn't all about, and just real quick, we were talking about the perimeter, right? You end users, invest 66% of your security dollars in securing the perimeter. And those 66% of your dollars are 24% effective. That's scary. That's really scary. Our customers manage their budgets to the nickels, yet you're spending 2/3 of your security budget on something that only works a quarter of the time. Something to think about. What that argues for is looking inside. It's kind of an inside job, right? Understand your data, understand the way that data flows through your organization, and having that insight will go a long way towards establishing the kind of security posture that your CEO can be proud of.
Key comment, it's executive sponsorship. It's starting from the top and going down. If you don't have executive sponsorship, or if you don't have a Chris Close, then all lines of business have to come together as a steering committee and understand compliance together. They need to understand their security risks together. They need to address risks differently than they ever have before. They need to sharpen their tool sets to, again, protect the business from liability, to increase your value during mergers and acquisitions, very important thing. So I want to ask our audience, again, do you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists before I wrap this up? Tom Weisenberger. What's up, man? How you doing?
So, kind of piggyback on the last statements, that you have to look internal, and then the other statement that 80% of the data is going to flow east to west, and that these guys are in there for months at a time. From a panel aspect and, across the board, are there kind of common denominators of things that people need to look at, or different threats that are being overlooked within that east-west traffic that are kind of, these are the top 3 things that our customers can take back and say, I've never even thought about this because I'm only out on the perimeter right now. What are the east-west kind of the big threats that people need to do, or are there some things that they can do to harden quickly?
Can I offer one? And I heard, again, an enormous amount about this last week. How many of you are familiar with the term RAM scraping? Okay, that's a relatively few number of hands. That is far and away the fastest growing threat to a lot of large enterprises. What RAM scraping is, it's a piece of malware that gets into your environment and that is able to wait until the milliseconds when data is moved from server storage, where it's by and large unencrypted, before it's moved off to long-term storage, which is inevitably going to be encrypted. Milliseconds. So this is a virus that's able to scrape that data at its most vulnerable point in your organization. I'd ask about that. That is according to the Verizon Data Breach Report, that is the fastest growing and potentially most noxious form of malware in your system right now.
Thank you. Any other questions before we start to wrap this up? I have a call to action for everybody when we finish. We've got a couple of minutes here. We're almost done. Eric Saraf.
I heard the panel talking about how the perimeter keeps moving and it's so difficult to track that. We also hear about these companies like Target and Anthem where they lost security, social securities or credit card numbers. So to me, it seems like a no-brainer that you got to encrypt that sensitive data. But when we go and talk to customers about encryption, the answer I get is that, well, the auditors came in this year and they didn't think that encryption is a problem, so we're going to look at encryption next year, and then next year and goes on and goes on. So my question is, do you guys think that encryption is a critical part of the security plan? And if so, why is it so rare? And at least for me, I find it difficult to deploy encryption at my clients.
I want to just start with a question. What auditor said encryption?
Yeah,
is
right.
bad? Let's just go there.
Actually, this is an interesting point to kind of socially discuss, which is auditors always follow, it's like law, right? It follows the market, it rarely leads it, right? So that's my response to that. Auditors, you get some kid fresh out of college, Accenture puts him on your floor, he's got a checkbox, he may not even be that good at understanding the questions he's asking. So to rely upon auditors to establish your policy or response or risk management strategy is
Insane.
unwise. Yeah.
I know you're going to want to jump into it, but I just want to make a comment that encryption actually can be viewed as a zoning technology, and when you start to look at compliance, especially like PCI, when you talk to the auditors, it's really about scoping and how little you have to do. The goal of compliance is to have as little in scope as possible and move it aside. And the thing about encryption, what people miss is that it's actually a way to do that. There's actually a way to break it apart and say none of these systems matter, and like these three. And then you have to start worrying about really complicated and expensive controls. So encryption is actually really cheap when you start to think about everything you don't have to do.
Right, exactly.
Encryption is zoning.
Encryption is super cheap in comparison to the average cost of $3.5 million of having to bring everybody in after the fact and clean up the house. Significant.
And I'm sure you have more to say.
So one more thing, if anybody here doesn't have, a default deny all outbound rule on your perimeter gateway, leave right now, go change that. But the other thing I was gonna say, and this is really interesting, Extra Hop is one of the most interesting things I've seen here this week. And if you don't already have a conversation with your developer staff and have a map of, here's all the places this application should be communicating, and if you can't map that for all the applications in your infrastructure, you need to be talking to these guys, because the only way to really find out what's going on in less than those 7 months is to know what's legitimate. And the only way to know what's legitimate is to map it all out. So either talk to all your developers, which will be probably like kicking and screaming, or put something like this in and figure it out. And then you can whitelist that stuff and analyze everything that's not in that list.
And if I can make a point to
you, Chris.
kind of tie those two together, especially coming back to encryption. So the conversation is really turning around now perimeters, but the idea is to protect what's coming in from outside. Realistically, you have people in your organization that will have access to data they probably should not have access to. What are you doing about that? And access controls are certainly important. But again, it comes back to looking at this holistically and the security posture. And I think this is one of those wonderful places where encryption can be a very meaningful but cost-effective way to secure against that. I mean, if you encrypt your data and you set controls for who can access the keys for that data, you can really achieve a granular level of control and separate that amongst people within your organization, so no one person has access to everything. And that becomes especially important, I'm sure, once you get into virtual machines and you start moving those around. Who do you want to have access to the data in those machines? Who do you want to have access to move those around? So I like the idea that we're talking about perimeters. They have a place, but that's one layer of the overall scheme. And
Right.
I think
Right.
thinking about who's in your organization, what they have access to, is important as well, and that comes back to encryption. An ounce of prevention can be worth a pound of cure.
I appreciate that. We're going to cut this a little short, guys, because the last thing I want to say is, ladies and gentlemen, you have a call to action. You must have that awkward conversation at the boardroom level, and you must talk about this. It's the only way to address the challenges in your organization is to have executive sponsorship, sponsored work streams from the top down that involve all lines of business to identify risk in a different way that you have done. Okay? It's like talking about the birds and the bees with your kids. Tell me that's not awkward. I mean, I don't have kids. I have a four-legged dependent, but that's a different story, right? But you understand what I'm saying, though. You understand what I'm saying? It's an awkward conversation. It's not happening enough. And you can't start from the bottom and go to the top stemming the bleeding or the leaking dike with technology. That is not where you start. It must start at the boardroom level. If you don't have a Chris Close or you don't have a chief information security officer, then you guys got to start a steering committee that talks about this, and always it has to be executive sponsored. That's the only way we're going to win this war, because the statistics are against us, okay? It's an unfair playing field. If each one of you were an endpoint in my network, the administrator or Chris Close has to protect all of you. All I got to do is subvert one. You're done. I got to subvert one, you got to protect 3,000 or 5,000 endpoints. So since those statistics are against us, again, the only way to procure investment is to involve the executives and have that boardroom conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I really, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for staying awake. I hope you found this session helpful. Again, have the conversation at the water cooler on Monday. I highly recommend it.